The Reading Life by C.S. Lewis. We're back with another book. If you watch the book review, the very quick one, you'll have my initial thoughts. But more details, more summary, more analysis, maybe. That's technically supposed to be what part of this is for. But there's not a lot to really analyze with this. If you haven't watched the original video, a couple days ago now, this book is multiple excerpts. So it does break down into parts and chapters to some extent, but you have some sections that are about that long. That's the whole chapter. And this is actually just, it's an excerpt. He has letters to friends in here, small sections like that. There's some longer ones in here. His letter to J.R.R. Tolkien reviewing The Lord of the Rings is actually a relatively long one. And it's just a mixed bag. So, The Reading Life by C.S. Lewis, subtext, the joy of seeing new worlds through others' eyes. This is put together by someone whose name I didn't necessarily see in the reading, but it is pieced together and collected from his writings and his letters. So, knowing that, you're not going to get a consistent narrative, but you're going to get a story and a narrative in the form of literature and writing and the experience of reading. And this person has a very profound, C.S. Lewis, view on reading. And I could sit here and just quote this book to death if you can see how much I have, get that angle right, just dog eared and marked up pages. It's a lot, and the amount of things I've bracketed and underlined. And what I'm going to do is focus on two main things. One, the general takeaways that I have from this. And I'm going to read off a couple direct quotes that stood out to me. So I have a tendency to bracket things that I find important. If it's really short, I'll just underline it. But when something really stands out to me, something that I view as very important, I will star it as well. And when I star it, that's a reminder for me as I'm looking back through of like, hey, reread that. So whenever I thumb through a book again and I see something starred like this, I will always stop and look at it again. Because I will just mark anything that I find interesting in a story. So there might be something like this page where there's this section here, and over here where I bracket. I might not reread every bracketed section, so it depends on how I'm focusing in when I review books or go back to them later and want to glean more from them. It might not always be a full reread. It might just be reviewing the bracketed section. It's also fun to see over time when I reread certain books what I choose to re-bracket. Sometimes I'll double up on it, or I'll use a different color the second reading. And other times there's things that originally didn't stand out to me, but now they do, and they feel like a bigger deal as I've continued on in life. The other part is I cannot tell you the last time I read a book where the quantity of words that I didn't know was this much. There was 20 plus words. This is only like a 160 page book, 170 page book, roughly. 167. It was like every 3, 4 pages I was circling a word that I didn't know. So typically I'll just look a word up, but this got to the point where there were so many that I just started circling every word that I had never heard before. Some of them are other languages, and so that's fair, but a lot of them are just words that this guy is using that I did not know. So it's just cool. I feel like, you know, a lot of works nowadays don't really challenge vocabulary as much. And to have something now that does that for me is pretty cool. So I think it'd be fun just quickly to read off every single word that I learned. And I shouldn't even say learned, that I had new exposure to. A couple of them are phrases or a series of words. And again, not all of them are English. And I'm not going to pronounce all of them right because that's part of the joy of reading. When you learn a new word through reading, you probably aren't going to guarantee that you can pronounce it well because you've read it, not heard it. So, yeah, here is a list of words that when I read it, I did not know what it meant. Some of them I could feel like I could maybe guess, but I didn't know for sure. So I circled them in no particular order other than how I came across them. We have connaître, savoir, erleben, unevocably, affectation, hoc, sine qua non, phenomenologie de geste. That one I've totally mispronounced. Literae, humanois, wiseacre, prosaically, ascesis, agpu, impenitently, palliative, sordid, trumpery, dyslogistic, ineluctable, lineaments, mythopoeia, tacit, prosaic, turpitude, truculent, reprobate, balderdash. Um, that was probably, well, that is the list, and that was probably a set of about 50% mispronunciations if I'm lucky. I I love when I don't know words in books. There's so much to learn. One of the reasons we read is to learn new things. And I think it's really cool to learn new words in that process. I also really love it when authors use words from other languages. So, the majority of what I read is in English. And when I see words that are not in English, it's fun. It's a way to expand your vocabulary in a foreign language sense without actually having to study that other language. And I think that's awesome. Um, so yeah, I believe in authors using the right word for the situation, and sometimes it's a different language. Um, Greek and Spanish have this too, where we might say I love something, and in Greek you have your multiple words for love. What is the one like eros, and you have agape and all these other ones. Spanish, you have like amor and encantar and um, gosh, even querer in some forms you use that to say I love you, and you can just have this description that goes deeper on different levels, and you don't get it the same way. So I like that. Just use the word that makes sense, and if English doesn't have it and you have knowledge of other languages, just use that foreign word. I don't think that's a problem in reading at all. Might confuse some people if you don't put it in italics, but this book does a great job. I love learning new words when I read. Um, and I don't have a lot of comment on the prose and the way this is written, but C.S. Lewis does have a way of writing that is unique and I would say missed in today's society. Certain things definitely become dated, and there are ways that we don't write anymore. I mean, Shakespearean is a great example. Most of us aren't really interested in Shakespeare style writing and the Elizabethan way of communicating and writing. It's still a unique form. So, no, I don't think it should always look the exact same. However, there's a elegance to his writing that a lot of authors miss. I think we have a lot of authors nowadays who they tell a story better than they evoke the story. You don't necessarily get sucked in to the world and the experience. I think any good fiction and nonfiction tells a story. If you look at the some of the best-selling nonfiction books, things like and like pretty densely nonfiction, you think of like The Body Keeps the Score as one. Oh, what's the other one I'm thinking of? Books like Sapiens and The Gene, these denser topics, there's still a narrative happening. There's storytelling, Atomic Habits, things like this. Like you're getting an experience in that. There's a story being told, and within that, there's something evocative. You feel and connect with it, and that's what makes any good story, in my opinion, is can you deliver the story and the narrative in a way that brings people along, and can you put your sentences together in a way that makes people feel like they are also experiencing that story. And it's not necessarily an easy skill. It's something I actually value a lot and wish I could do a lot better. C.S. Lewis just knows how to keep attention, and he knows how to express how he's feeling and doesn't shy away from opinions either. And I think a lot of people either know him primarily for his fiction or nonfiction, which I guess I'm saying they primarily know him for something he writes. But you have the Chronicles of Narnia and his space trilogy, which some people lean more that direction, where they say C.S. Lewis, I like him as a writer, and they're thinking fiction. Then you have other people who are reading Screwtape Letters and Mere Christianity and The Problem of Pain and Grief Observed, and they're like, I like this fiction or nonfiction side of this guy. Truth is, he's good at both, but I think his overall literary legacy is probably Narnia, but his philosophical legacy is these other works. and the reading life will take you deeper into all that. I said in my last video that I would consider it required reading if you read books. And um, obviously, you can say required reading about anything and be flippant about it. I'm very careful with that. I don't recommend books to people lightly either because they take time, and people's time is important and valuable. So any time that I encourage someone to do something, I want to make sure I feel like for them it's worth their time. And I feel like if you read books at all, this is worth your time. He's very, very, very good at encouraging a deeper understanding of why we read and what we're going for. And he's a huge supporter of fiction and nonfiction, and that nonfiction takes you to new worlds and you get the author's experience. And even in fiction, you have that too, where you're literally taken to new worlds, even if it's a version of the world we live in. It's a perspective of the author, and their perspective of the world might not be yours. And it's not about right or wrong perspective. It's the way that they're building this world, whether through a fictional or non fictional thing, is through their experience and interpretation. If you ask 20 people to write a nonfiction story, or better yet, if you showed 20 people a 5-minute short film and told them to describe that short film, is the fiction of this film. I want you to spend 60 seconds describing this 5 minute. You'll probably get 20 different descriptions, and they're all going to be accurate and probably mostly correct. We might get some details wrong, but they're going to describe it because it hit them in their own experience differently. Therefore, their description will be different, even if it overall accounts for the same thing. We see this with eyewitness testimony stuff. We remember and interpret things differently than the person next to us, which is why typically when you have 5 people give the exact same story, there's a higher chance that they're lying about what happened, because that is more of a sign of rehearsing something versus 5 stories that are slightly different but get the point across. This is one of the big contention points with talking about the gospel's accuracy or not, is they're not supposed to be 100% the same, because we've learned differently with eyewitness testimony and story recounts. So yeah, just his reflection on going to new worlds, and he gives beautiful arguments for why we should be reading fiction and fantasy. And for someone as intellectual as him to hear descriptions of childlike behavior and investment in fantasy is beautiful. And I think it's a very strong sign of maturity. And for those that don't know, I'm trained in play therapy. Technically my professional expertise is psychotherapy with kids and families with young kids. And play is, if you can change anything about how you behave in day-to-day life, learning how to make everything playful will have one of the biggest impacts on your life over almost anything else. And it doesn't mean making sad things happy. It just means, can you learn how to make recording a YouTube video play and fun? Can you learn how to have interactions with your wife, your husband, your partner, playful and fun and flirtatious and joyful? If you can turn something into play, it becomes fun and exciting, and it becomes easier to learn, it becomes easier to engage. We have better relationships. I would imagine we live longer as well because your stress goes down, though I cannot point to that research, but the stress reduction you can, and play does reduce stress in a lot of ways. So by that connecting theme, I would say so. Fiction's important, and I'm a big, big, big proponent of reading fiction, so much so where it's very hard for me to take reading advice from people who don't read fiction. Because to me, that's a decision to close off your mind to an extremely important part of storytelling and reading. Um, do I disregard people who don't? No. There's a lot of wisdom from a lot of people. But it makes it very hard for me to connect with someone as a fellow reader when they don't read fiction. And the same is true the other way, to connect with a fellow reader when they don't read nonfiction. I have my most joyful conversations about books with people who read fiction and nonfiction and are not afraid of that. And that includes reading children's books, having this open mind for what we are reading. He's so good in these excerpts of breaking that down and the importance of why we should read children's books as adults, and specifically good ones. He does have opinions on what makes a good book, so he's not just saying, oh, all books are good. It'd be really funny to hear his thoughts today on kind of this book talk culture with this huge uptick in people reading, romance or smut content, and young adult content, and that's very divisive in a certain way of people saying it's just good that people are reading and bookstores are doing better and people are talking about books, and then other people saying, yeah, but they're reading garbage. It's like, sure, I would love to hear his thoughts on this, but um, the point being, just like with anything in life, the more you can expand your experience of it, the better. So, someone just reading, and you fill in what this means to you. You say, "Oh, that person's just reading garbage," and you say, "I'm only reading quality works." There's some subjectivity to that. I think there's probably some objectivity to that in some sense, but the bigger question to me is how wide is that swath of learning for you? If I'm reading this Reading Life by C.S. Lewis, I have this one here, and I have this one that I'm wrapping up, Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield, hoping to finish Mistborn, The Final Empire soon. That one's taken me too many attempts to try. I have a book on communist warfare that I'm reading because it's interesting, among a bunch of other things. I like that mix. And one of the best ways to better understand culture and experiences is to read, especially autobiographical things, but fiction from other things. I'd be curious to ask anyone, when you look at your reading list of fiction, is there diversity in the people writing it? It doesn't necessarily matter explicitly because diversity subsections out dramatically, depending on what you focus on. But some of the most interesting parts of my reading have been expanding over to Russian literature with things like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, Nigerian literature, things Chinua Achebe with Things Fall Apart. Um, there's another one that I really like. There's a lot of good Nigerian authors. More recently, expanding to South African reading. There's some really good Chinese and Japanese reading. The um, uh, Silence by Indo, which was made into a Scorsese film, which is fantastic. And you have things like the Three Body Problem, The Remembrance of Earth's Past by Cixin Liu, I believe, and that the Chinese reading, just being able to bounce around to different experiences. And same with, it's like I'm read atheist fiction and Christian fiction, and um, it just expands you in a way that a lot of other things don't. And the fact that it's written, it allows your imagination to intersect with it differently than film or music, where a lot of the information is in your face, where this is how it sounds, this is how it looks. But when you read, it's just words on paper and the imagination that kicks into your mind. So I could go for hours about that, but you can understand maybe why this would connect with mental health in such a way that I would want to bring it up here. So I want to read a couple of these standout quotes. For me, there were four that I starred and three that I am choosing to, or five that I starred, four that I'm choosing to share here. One of the earlier quotes, he states, "When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up." I love that. To not be afraid of, and my wording would be childlike nature. I would separate those out, but it doesn't really matter. Of becoming a man, becoming a woman, you put away childish things. You can't be a child, you have to grow up. However, one of the things that you can put away is the fear of being childlike and a desire to be very grown up. I think if you think about people you admire in life, a lot of them, again, know how to be playful. They know how to have fun, and they know how to engage in a way that's childlike. And these are also people who can have good relationships with kids. If you struggle to interact with children, which a lot of you do, you might be being overly concerned about being an adult and not willing to unlock that. Now, you might have been robbed from your childhood and never learned how to be a child. That's another thing, that's a therapy room thing. But I just love that quote and the honesty from someone who's deeply intellectual of making sure we maintain that playful spirit. The next quote from page 82 of the book: "The greatest cause of verbicide is the fact that most people are obviously far more anxious to express their approval or disapproval of things than to describe them." So, verbicide, killing your words, essentially. is that people are obviously far more anxious to express their approval or disapproval than to describe. For instance, this is an exercise I'll do in therapy with people sometimes, is we'll listen to music and I'll have them describe the song. And it's often very easy to describe music in a descriptive way that does not cast approval or disapproval. Now, some people will, but we can listen and say, I can hear the bass doing this, I hear the piano doing this, I feel sad at this part. The song went by quickly. There's not necessarily value in that versus saying at the end, oh, the song was bad, or I don't like how they did that, or I love that they did that guitar riff. And we're describing approval and disapproval. We're describing value statements versus just describing what things are. And so he makes a bit of an argument that words are meant to communicate and describe, not primarily to criticize or even necessarily encourage, but to just state what is. And he has a long section on the value of words in here, which is phenomenal. And one of the key topics he addresses with that is the word barbaric, and we call something barbaric. And the original meaning of that word was in relation to the barbarians, the actual people group. And to say that something is barbaric is to describe something that the barbarians do. Now, if I said something is barbaric now, what are the chances that I or anyone else could actually describe characteristics of the barbarians? And so we dumb down words. He goes into it again. You know, he was a Christian philosopher for a large part of his career. So he talks about the breakdown of the word Christian as well. And I think most people in today's society would agree, especially people who are Christian, that that word doesn't actually hold a lot of weight. If someone says they're Christian, it means almost nothing unless they describe it because it's such a broad word and it means so much. And if we say something, he has a really funny line, and I don't know that I underlined it, but he talks about the quality of books. And if someone says that they read a great book, if I were to say this book is great, this is a phenomenal, wonderful book, then I'm using that word to now set a standard. And he says if you describe a bad book as a good book, then now the standard for good is trash. And he just makes a really funny argument about the utility of criticism and why maybe some people shouldn't give strong opinions about books because now that opinion is watered down because of how they've used it. And when people say, "Oh, that's great," or "I love that," or "I'm a fan of this," it means nothing if you're a fan of everything. Because when you say you're a fan of something, what you're saying is, "I'm a fanatic for it." And I actually meet very few people that are fanatic about anything, or at least about a lot of things, rather. I do know football fans that are genuinely fanatic, and then I would not say I'm a fan of any sport. I enjoy some. Um, I played them. Fanatic is it's not the right word, even if it's shortened to fan. So how we kind of dumb down words or build them up, even in a sense where we give power to ones that are not meant to have that much power. So it's just a really cool quote, and this book will make you really think about how you use your words as well and how you approach critique. Next quote is from page 131. He states, "For a great deal, not all, of our literature was made to be read lightly, for entertainment. If we do not read it, in a sense, for fun, and with our feet on the fender, we are not using it as it was meant to be used, and all our criticism of it will be pure illusion, for you cannot judge any artifact except by using it as it was intended. It is no good judging a butter knife by seeing whether it will saw logs. Much bad criticism, indeed, results from the efforts of critics to get a work time result out of something that never aimed at producing more than pleasure." So, again, beautifully written. Criticism is useless if we don't understand the intention of what we're criticizing rather. He used the example, you can't judge a butter knife by its ability to saw a log. Einstein has a good quote as well that goes something like, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life feeling like it's an idiot or that it's a failure. You have to align criticism and judgment with the intention of something. I'll often joke with friends that I don't feel like Rotten Tomatoes or some of these other critique sites are fair, and that there should be a category for just, is it a good film and did it do what it was trying to do? And my example is a lot of the Transformers films, which I know some people argue some of them are like genuinely good. I don't disagree with that, but they're $1 billion films until lately, but definitely the first four or five. And looking at what are they trying to do? And a lot of Michael Bay film and a lot of action films, they're just trying to give you an action-packed fun time. If you go into the film and it's full of action and you have a couple moments you're like, whoa, or you just get the big gasp from the audience and like, oh, especially with brutal scenes. You see that in a lot of John Wick. If you go to see those films, there are some brutal kills and people love it. And now those are really quality films, really quality action. But what's the point? Why are you going to the theater? If you're going to the theater to watch something explosive and intense and you leave and it was that, then by that definition, it did what it was supposed to, even if it got a 30% score on Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb gave it a 5. Did it do what it was supposed to? And that is different than, is it objectively, critically brilliant? Did you get what you were supposed to? And did it give you what it said it was going to give you? Did you get what you expected, more or less, minus the expected surprises that films will throw away? And the same with books. Are you reading to just enjoy the book and have pleasure? And he's making the argument that most books are designed for entertainment and pleasure. And if you're getting entertained and you're receiving pleasure from it, it's doing its job. And then if you go to another book to learn, the standard shifts. Are you learning? Are you getting what you were promised? And I do think that is really helpful to pay attention to, and it definitely helps me a lot looking at other reviews. Is sometimes you maybe have had this experience where you hear a reviewer talking about something or a critic and you just think they don't get it, they don't understand it. A lot of critics say that about society, but I don't necessarily think critics are in all cases a step above the average person. It's more of a question of, again, are you getting what you were promised? Is the author holding up to their end of the bargain? They say you're going to be entertained. Am I entertained? They say you're going to learn something. Did I learn something? Then there you go. So criticism is important to match the his word, the artifact. Does the artifact do what it was intended to do? It's just a really good reminder. That's something important for me of how I engage with something. Am I trying to relax and have leisure? Then that's what I'm trying to do. It doesn't need to be productive. So the fourth and final quote that I'll read here is from page 135, where he states, "By having a great many friends, I do not prove that I have a wide appreciation of human excellence. You might as well say I prove the width of my literary taste by being able to enjoy all the books in my study. The answer is the same in both cases. You chose those books. You chose those friends. Of course they suit you. The truly wide taste in reading is that which enables a man to find something for his needs on the sixpenny tray outside any second-hand bookshop. The truly wide taste in humanity will similarly find something to appreciate in the cross-section of humanity whom one has to meet every day." Yeah, so I love the comparison between experiencing people and experiencing books. To say that you have a good taste in books and then to point at your bookshelf as an example of that is the same as saying I have a good taste in friends and pointing at your friends. I would agree that there's some validity in that. You can tell a lot about a person by their bookshelf and by their friend group. But the point that he's making is to say you're a good friend or a good person might be the same as saying you're a good reader, in the sense that you have learned how to interact with other humans healthily. So to say I have 5 close friends, but everyone else I know doesn't like me and I'm having bad interactions with people, what that shows is I actually don't know how to interact with people. I've found a group of people who accept me and who I can be with, but in every other relationship, I'm burning it. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm hurting people's feelings. Like, you have not learned how to interact with people. You've not learned how to have healthy relationships. You have found some. Just in the same sense that I could say this book is amazing, and one of you listening could read it and be like, it is amazing. And it'd be the only amazing book that you know. There's a lot of subjectivity to that. But the thing is, just because you have found some things doesn't mean you know how to find more or how to handle them well. So his argument there is, can you glean value from I actually couldn't tell you what a six-penny tray is. I'm envisioning, though, secondhand bookstore, that cart out front that has all these books being sold for $1 or $2 that, they're in a position where they could practically be stolen and the person wouldn't care who owns the shop. You grab it, go and buy it. It's a $1 book. Can you find value? And there are a lot of people that I know who do that very well, where they can just be like, oh, it's a cheap book and sounds interesting. I can enjoy myself with this, or I can learn something. So I think that's a good perspective of not assuming that because you have chosen these things, that means your taste is good and that you know how to have good relationships or enjoy good books. And I think the same is true for music and movies. Like, I see this actually a lot with movies where people describe movies that they really enjoy and they list a lot of really good American films. But then when you actually look at people online who are really deep into film, or if you know someone who's really into film, they will bring up Spanish films, French films, Chinese films, Russian films. They will bring up things that aren't in English. They will bring up potentially short films, 4-hour films, genres that you don't engage with, and this fuller depth. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying mainstream blockbusters as your primary form of cinema. But it's also worth noting that that's not an expansive taste. And that's fine. I don't think we're all required to have an expansive taste in everything that we do. But again, to connect this back with mental health is understanding that you have a limited view of the world. And one of the best ways to increase that view and perspective is to engage in media, not the news. Let me be very clear with that. That's actually probably a very bad way to expand your knowledge and you'll narrow yourself in most cases. But to go into a lot of non agenda based experiences, a film that someone makes saying, this is my experience or my perspective, a book that's written that says the same thing, this is my experience, my perspective, music where the person is describing how they feel. These aren't about you, these are about how people experience things. And we get to have opinions about it, we get to feel it, and we get to create our own things and we describe our own things and we experience our own things. And if you want to expand your understanding of people, engage in their creations and you will learn more about them. So go read this book. You're doing yourself a favor. The Reading Life by C.S. Lewis. I think that's about it. So pick it up, read it, enjoy it. If you have read it or you want to read it or you get around to reading it, let me know below because I want to talk to more people about this book. I stopped my wife multiple times to read her sections from it because I loved it so much, and I'm now harassing her to read it, which she's pretty much read like a third of it already, just me quoting it. So read it, tell me what you think, and yeah, thanks for making it this far. See ya.